Galloping Foxley, read by Geoffrey Palmer.
5 days a week, for 36 years, I have travelled the 8:12 train to the city. It is never unduly crowded, and it takes me right into Cannon Street Station, only an 11.5-minute walk from the door of my office in Austin Friars. I have always liked the process of commuting. Every phase of the little journey is a pleasure to me. There is a regularity about it that is agreeable and comforting to a person of habit, and in addition it serves as a sort of slipway along which I am gently but firmly launched into the waters of daily business routine. Ours is a smallish station, and only 19 or 20 people gather there to catch the 8:12. We are a group that rarely changes, and when occasionally a new face appears on the platform, it causes a certain disclamatory Protestant ripple, like a new bird in a cage of canaries. But normally, when I arrive in the morning with my usual 4 minutes to spare, there they all are, these good, solid, steadfast people, standing in their right places with their right umbrellas and hats and ties and faces and their newspapers under their arms, as unchanged and unchangeable through the years as the furniture in my own living room. I like that. I like also my corner seat by the window, and reading the Times to the noise and motion of the train. This part of it lasts 32 minutes, and it seems to soothe both my brain and my fretful old body like a good long massage. Believe me, there's nothing like routine and regularity for preserving one's peace of mind. So, you can see that I am, in every sense of the words, a contented commuter. Or it would be more accurate to say that I was a contented commuter. It was last Tuesday, the Tuesday after Easter, a warm, yellow spring morning, and I was striding onto the platform of our small country station with the Times tucked under my arm, when I immediately became aware that something was wrong. I could actually feel that curious little ripple of protest running along the ranks of my fellow commuters. I stopped and glanced round. The stranger was standing plumb in the middle of the platform, feet apart and arms folded, looking for all the world as though he owned the whole place. He was a biggish, thick-set man, and even from behind he somehow managed to convey a powerful impression of arrogance and oil. Very definitely, he was not one of us. He carried a cane instead of an umbrella. His shoes were brown instead of black. The grey hat was cocked at a ridiculous angle, and in one way and another there seemed to be an excess of silk and polish about his person. The train came in, and now try if you can to imagine my horror when the new man actually followed me into my own compartment. Nobody had done this to me for 15 years. My colleagues always respect my seniority. One of my special little pleasures is to have the place to myself for at least 1, sometimes 2 or even 3 stations. But here, if you please, was this fellow, this stranger, straddling the seat opposite, rustling the Daily Mail and lighting a disgusting pipe. I lowered my Times and stole a glance at his face. I suppose he was about the same age as me, 62 or 3. Suddenly he glanced up, and our eyes met. "Do you mind the pipe?" he asked, holding it up in his fingers. That was all he said, but the sound of his voice had a sudden and extraordinary effect on me. In fact, I think I jumped. Then I sort of froze up and sat staring at him for at least a minute before I got hold of myself and made an answer. "This is a smoker," I said, "so you may do as you please." "I just thought I'd ask." There it was again, that curiously crisp, familiar voice. Where had I heard it before? And why did every word seem to strike upon some tiny, tender spot far back in my memory? I felt a peculiar kind of discomfort that I cannot quite describe, something to do with pain and with violence, perhaps even with fear. The next morning, there he was again, standing in the middle of the platform, this time swinging his cane casually back and forth through the air. The cane! That did it. I stopped like I'd been shot. "It's Foxley!" I cried under my breath. "Galloping Foxley!" And still swinging his cane. I stepped closer to get a better look. I tell you, I've never had such a shock in all my life. It was Foxley, all right. Bruce Foxley, or Galloping Foxley, as we used to call him. And the last time I'd seen him, let me see, it was at school, and I was no more than 12 or 13 years old. At that point the train came in, and heaven help me if he didn't get into my compartment once again. He put his hat and cane up on the rack. "Ripping day, isn't it?" he said. "Just like summer." There was no mistaking the voice now. It hadn't changed at all, except that the things I had been used to hearing it say were different. "All right, Perkins," it used to say. "All right, you nasty little boy. I'm about to beat you again." How long ago was that? It must be nearly 50 years. Extraordinary, though, how little the features had altered. Still the same arrogant tilt of the chin, the flaring nostrils, the contemptuous staring eyes that were too small and a shade too close together for comfort. And now I watched Foxley settle back in his seat and begin reading the paper. It was a curious sensation, sitting only a yard away from the man who 50 years before had made me so miserable that I had once contemplated suicide. He hadn't recognized me. There wasn't much danger of that because of my moustache. Looking back on it, there seems little doubt that I suffered very badly at the hands of Bruce Foxley my first year in school. And strangely enough, the unwitting cause of it all was my father. I was 12 and a half when I first went off to this fine old public school. That was, let me see, in 1907. My father, who wore a silk topper and morning coat, escorted me to the station. And I can remember how we were standing on the platform among the piles of wooden tuck boxes and trunks and what seemed like thousands of very large boys milling about and talking and shouting at one another, when suddenly somebody who was wanting to get by us gave my father a great push from behind. My father, who was a small, courteous, dignified person, turned round with surprising speed and seized the culprit by the wrist. "Don't they teach you better manners than that at this school, young man?" he said. The boy, at least a head taller than my father, looked down at him with a cold, arrogant glare and said nothing. "Seems to me," my father said, staring back at him, "that an apology would be in order." But the boy just kept looking down his nose at my father. "You strike me as being an impudent and ill-mannered boy," my father went on, "and I can only pray that you are an exception in your school. I would not wish for any son of mine to pick up such habits." At this point, the boy inclined his head slightly in my direction, and a pair of small, cold, rather close-together eyes looked down into mine. I was not particularly frightened at the time. I knew nothing about the power of senior boys over junior boys in public schools, and I can remember that I looked straight back at him in support of my father, whom I adored and respected. When my father started to say something more, the boy simply turned away and sauntered slowly down the platform into the crowd. Bruce Foxley never forgot this episode. And, of course, the really unlucky thing about it for me was that when I arrived at school, I found myself in the same house as him. Even worse than that, I was in his study. He was doing his last year, and he was a prefect, a bozer, we called it, and as such he was officially permitted to beat any of the fags in the house. But being in his study, I automatically became his own particular personal slave. I was his valet and cook and maid and errand boy, and it was my duty to see that he never lifted a finger for himself unless absolutely necessary. In no society that I know of in the world is a servant imposed upon to the extent that we wretched little fags were imposed upon by the Bowsers at school. In frosty or snowy weather, I even had to sit on the seat of the lavatory, which was in an unheated outhouse, every morning after breakfast, to warm it before Foxley came along. I could remember how he used to saunter across the room in his loose-jointed, elegant way, and if a chair were in his path, he would knock it aside, and I would have to run over and pick it up. He wore silk shirts, and always had a silk handkerchief tucked up his sleeve, and his shoes were made by someone called Lob. They were pointed shoes, and it was my duty to rub the leather with a bone for 15 minutes each day to make it shine. But the worst memories of all had to do with the changing room. I could see myself now, a small, pale shrimp of a boy, standing just inside the door of this huge room, in my pyjamas and bedroom slippers and brown camel-hair dressing-gown. A single bright electric bulb was hanging on a flex from the ceiling, and all around the walls the black and yellow football shirts with their sweaty smell filling the room, and the voice, the clipped voice, was saying, "So, which is it to be this time? 6 with the dressing-gown on, or 4 with it off?" I never could bring myself to answer this question. I would simply stand there staring down at the dirty floor planks, dizzy with fear, and unable to think of anything except that this other, larger boy would soon start smashing away at me with his long, thin, white stick, slowly, scientifically, skilfully, legally, and with apparent relish. And I would bleed. 5 hours earlier, I had failed to get the fire to light in his study. I had spent my pocket money on a box of special firelighters, and I had held a newspaper across the chimney opening to make a draught, and I had knelt down in front of it and blown my guts out into the bottom of the grate. But the fire would not burn. "If you're too obstinate to answer," the voice was saying, "then I'll have to decide for you." I wanted desperately to answer because I knew which one I had to choose. It's the first thing you learn when you arrive. Always keep the dressing-gown on and take the extra strokes. Otherwise you are almost certain to get cut. Even 3 with it on is better than 1 with it off. "Take it off, then, and get into the far corner and touch your toes. I'm going to give you 4. Slowly, I would take it off and lay it on the ledge above the boot lockers, and slowly I would walk over to the far corner, cold and naked now in my cotton pyjamas, treading softly and seeing everything around me suddenly very bright and flat and far away, like a magic lantern picture, and very big and very unreal, and sort of swimming through the water in my eyes. "Go on and touch your toes. Tighter, much tighter than that." Then he would walk down to the far end of the changing room, and I would be watching him upside down between my legs, and he would disappear through a doorway that led down 2 steps into what we called the basin passage. This was a stone-floored corridor with wash-basins along one wall, and beyond it was the bathroom. When Foxley disappeared, I knew he was walking down to the far end of the basin passage. Foxley always did that. Then, in the distance, but echoing loud among the basins and the tiles, I would hear the noise of his shoes on the stone floor as he started galloping forward, and through my legs I would see him leaping up the 2 steps into the changing room and come bounding towards me with his face thrust forward and the cane held high in the air. This was the moment when I shut my eyes and waited for the crack and told myself that whatever happened, I must not straighten up. Anyone who has been properly beaten will tell you that the real pain does not come until about 8 or 10 seconds after the stroke. The stroke itself is merely a loud crack and a sort of blunt thud against your backside, numbing you completely. I'm told a bullet wound does the same. But later on, oh my heavens, it feels as if someone is laying a red-hot poker right across your naked buttocks, and it is absolutely impossible to prevent yourself from reaching back and clutching it with your fingers. Foxley knew all about this time lag, and the slow walk back over a distance that must altogether have been 15 yards gave each stroke plenty of time to reach the peak of its pain before the next one was delivered. On the fourth stroke, I would invariably straighten up. I couldn't help it. It was an automatic defence reaction from a body that had had as much as it could stand. "You flinched," Foxley would say. "That doesn't count. Go on. Down you get." The next time I would remember to grip my ankles. Afterwards, he would watch me as I walked over, very stiff now and holding my backside, to put on my dressing gown. But I would always try to keep turned away from him so he couldn't see my face. And when I went out, it would be, "Hey, you, come back." I was in the passage then, and I would stop and turn and stand in the doorway waiting. "Come here. Come on, come back here. Now, haven't you forgotten something?" All I could think of at that moment was the excruciating burning pain in my behind. "You strike me as being an impudent and ill-mannered boy," he would say, imitating my father's voice. "Don't they teach you better manners than that at this school?" "Thank you," I would stammer. "Thank you for the beating." And then back up the dark stairs to the dormitory. And it became much better then, because it was all over, and the pain was going, and the others were clustering around and treating me with a certain rough sympathy born of having gone through the same thing themselves many times. "Hey, Perkins, let's have a look. How many do you get?" "5, wasn't it? We heard them easily from here. Come on, man, let's see the marks." I would take down my pyjamas and stand there while this group of experts solemnly examined the damage. "Rather far apart, aren't they? Not quite up to Foxley's usual standard. Well, 2 of them are close, actually touching. Look, these 2 are beauties. That low one was a rotten shot." Then the door would open, and Foxley would be there. And everyone would scatter and pretend to be doing his teeth or saying his prayers, while I was left standing in the centre of the room with my pyjamas down. "What's going on here?" Foxley would say, taking a quick look at his own handiwork. "You, Perkins, put your pyjamas on properly and get into bed." And that was the end of a day. Through the week I never had a moment of time to myself. If Foxley saw me in the study taking up a novel, or perhaps opening my stamp album, he would immediately find something for me to do. But the most dreaded day was Sunday. Sunday was for cleaning the study, and how well I can remember waiting for Foxley to come in to inspect. He would stroll over to the drawer of his desk and take out a single white glove, fitting it slowly onto his right hand, and I would stand there watching and trembling as he moved around the room, running his white-gloved forefinger along the picture tops, the skirting, the shelves, the window-sills, the lampshades. Nearly always it managed to discover some tiny crack that I had overlooked, and when this happened, Foxley would turn slowly around, smiling that dangerous little smile that wasn't a smile. "Well," he would say, "so you're a lazy little boy, aren't you?" No answer. "Are you or are you not a nasty, lazy little boy?" "Yes." "But your father wouldn't want you to grow up like that, would he? Your father is very particular about manners. Therefore I will be doing him a favour if I punish you, won't I?" "I don't know." "Won't I?" "Yes." "We will meet later then, after prayers, in the changing room." The rest of the day would be spent in an agony of waiting for the evening to come. It was all coming back to me now. To burn Foxley's toast was a beatable offence. So was forgetting to take the mud off Foxley's football boots. So was failing to hang up Foxley's football clothes. So was rolling up Foxley's brolly the wrong way round. So was banging the study door when Foxley was working. So was not cleaning the buttons properly on Foxley's OTC uniform. So was failing to shine the soles of Foxley's shoes. So was leaving Foxley's study untidy at any time. In fact, so far as Foxley was concerned, I was practically a beatable offence myself. I glanced out of the window. My goodness, we were nearly there. I must have been dreaming away like this for quite a while, and I hadn't even opened my Times. Foxley was still leaning back in the corner seat opposite me, reading his Daily Mail, and through a cloud of blue smoke from his pipe I could see the top half of his face over the newspaper, the small, bright eyes, the corrugated forehead, the wavy, slightly oily hair. Looking at him now after all that time was a peculiar and rather exciting experience. I knew he was no longer dangerous, but the old memories were still there, and I didn't feel altogether comfortable in his presence. It was something like being inside the cage with a tame tiger. What nonsense is this? I asked myself. Don't be so stupid. My heavens, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and tell him exactly what you thought of him, and he couldn't touch you. Hey, that was an idea. Except that, well, after all, was it worth it? I was too old for that sort of thing now, and I wasn't sure that I really felt much anger towards him anyway. So, what should I do? I couldn't sit there staring at him like an idiot. At that point, a little impish fancy began to take hold of me. What I would like to do, I told myself, would be to lean across and tap him lightly on the knee and tell him who I was. Then I would watch his face. After that I would begin talking about our school days together, making it loud enough for the other people in the compartment to hear. I would remind him playfully of some of the things he used to do to me, and perhaps even describe the changing-room beatings so as to embarrass him a trifle. A bit of teasing and discomfort wouldn't do him any harm, and it would do me an awful lot of good. Suddenly he glanced up and caught me staring at him. It was the second time this had happened, and I noticed a flicker of irritation in his eyes. All right, I told myself. Here we go. But keep it pleasant and sociable and polite. It'll be much more effective that way, more embarrassing for him. So I smiled at him and gave him a courteous little nod. Then, raising my voice, I said, I do hope you'll excuse me. I'd like to introduce myself. I was leaning forward, watching him closely, so as not to miss the reaction. My name is Perkins, William Perkins, and I was at Repton in 1907. The others in the compartment were sitting very still, and I could sense that they were all listening and waiting to see what would happen next. I'm glad to meet you, he said, lowering the paper to his lap. Mine's Fortescue, Jocelyn Fortescue, Eton, 1916.